All right, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Sarah Karmel is currently the head of the chemistry department at Photocentric, where she looks after the development of novel photopolymer materials for 3D printing applications. She was the Blavatnik Fellow at the University of Cambridge in the Dr. Reisner group. She has a PhD in the synthesis of organoactinide complexes. Worked under Professor Eisen. You're gonna have to tell me how to pronounce that.
Eisen is fine, yeah. It was actinides.
Thank you. Not a chemist here. Worked under Dr. Eisen or Professor Eisen at the Israel Institute of Technology. Today she spends most of her time indulging in her real passion, which is 3D printing batteries. I'm super excited for this. Welcome, Dr. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everyone. So I will share my screen. I hope it will work so you can see my presentation. Great, application window. Amy, I think I have a problem. I can't share my screen. It doesn't let me share it.
Okay.
So I'm not sure, I can't see the PowerPoint. Do I have to go first into presentation mode for seeing the PowerPoint presentation? I think I got it, okay. Is it, I got it, perfect. My bad. So I guess I'll go now into presentation mode and you should be able to see my screen, hopefully.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen? Perfect, thank you very much. So after initial technical difficulties, welcome everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And I will talk to you today about visible light 3D printing for mass manufacturing. Actually, I will go into 3D printing from the macro scale, so from mass manufacturing to the nanoscale, so very accurate 3D printing in mass manufacturing. So I will first introduce the company, Photocentric, what we do, how we were formed. I will then talk a little bit about photopolymers and materials as a chemist. I will continue with the macro scale for 3D printing, so the use of 3D printing for mass manufacturing, and introduce you to a case study where we used 3D printing to manufacture more than 7 million parts. And at the end, I will touch onto our 3D printing on the nanoscale, so electric batteries. And with nano, I mean a very, very high accuracy rather than a small scale manufacturing. So we can do all of that because we have worked and invented the use of LCD screens for 3D printing. So our 3D printers are based on the use of visible light and LCD screens. We'll come to the technology a bit later. We also have a chemistry department where we develop our materials, photopolymers for 3D printing. And one of our focuses are on the development of renewable materials for 3D printing to enhance the carbon footprint of 3D printing and the circular economy of additive manufacturing. So Photocentric was formed in 2002, actually not on 3D printing, but on 2D printing. So we made photopolymers for craft stamps, office tabs, and flexographic printing. And this is still a part of the business. The 3D printing part of the business started in 2014 with the use of LCD screens and visible light for 3D printing. And now we have a variety of commercial 3D printers which all use visible light and LCD screens. So how does it actually work? Here you can see a cross-section of one of our LCD screen 3D printers, and you can see an LCD screen, and underneath the LCD screen, we have an LED array to enhance the light delivered by the LCD screen. On top of the LCD screen, you have a photopolymer vat, so it's a vat polymerization process. And you build your object layer by layer onto your build platform, which moves along the Z-axis. And what actually happens is that your LCD screen displays a pixel, which then cures a voxel, so a three-dimensional pixel of photopolymer in your vat. And you can imagine that an LCD screen, you can display a full layer at once. So on your LCD screen, you can display an image for your first layer, then you print this first layer on your platform, then a second layer, and so consecutively you build a three-dimensional object. And this has a lot of benefits as compared to, for example, lasers, because your laser will scan your photopolymer point by point, whereas your LCD screen will display a full layer at once. So it's a much faster process. It doesn't matter whether you print one object, small object, or an army of full objects on your bed, it will take the same amount of time. Here, and the choice of your LCD screen depends on two factors: the accuracy you require and also the build volume you require. So small LCD screens, for example, mobile phone LCD screens, will have a smaller pixel pitch and deliver therefore a higher accuracy. And if you want to have, you only want to build very large objects, you can go for a much larger LCD screen, which has a larger pixel pitch, but also a large build volume. And as I already mentioned, we use visible light for 3D printing. So most of the 3D printers on the market are based on UV light, so between 355 nanometers and 410 nanometers. We use much longer wavelengths, around 460 nanometers, for 3D printing. And this is a couple of benefits. The first one is safety. So visible light, 460 nanometers, is the same light as when you look outside, so it's daylight. So whenever you open your 3D printer, you're actually not looking into an intense UV lamp. The second one is visible light is also lower energy than UV light. So you're developing a lower energy process for 3D printing, which is again beneficial for the carbon footprint of additive manufacturing. And the last one is a chemistry reason. So visible light has a longer wavelength as compared to UV light. So it has lower energy, but a longer wavelength. And that enables visible light to penetrate deeper into your photopolymer resins and actually develop a more even cure as compared to UV light. So these are all the reasons why we use visible light. And a little bit about the photopolymerization. So I've mentioned a couple of times that we're using photopolymers, and the process is based on photopolymerization. And photopolymerization in general, when you develop a material, it's formulation chemistry. And in formulation chemistry, what happens is that you mix your components, which you want in your final resin, into a vessel. This vessel can be a bucket, but it's usually not a bucket, and you have a stable formulation. So as compared to classical chemistry, where you mix components and it starts fuming and you have a chemical reaction because you want to have a chemical reaction, here you don't want a chemical reaction. You want something which is stable and only reacts whenever it has an external stimulus, for example, light in this case. So the stable formulation only reacts when it's illuminated. And your formulation, which is your liquid photopolymer resin, consists of different components. You have usually an oligomer, which dictates the mechanical properties, in monomers, and you have a catalyst and co-catalyst, which form your photoinitiator system. Whenever you illuminate this liquid resin with light, you create a cross-linking process. So the different monomers and oligomers are cross-linked through chemical bonds. So your parts are very, very functional and they can resist a lot of environmental conditions, for example, humidity and so on. Also, these parts won't melt. So if you heat them, they don't melt. It's a typical thermoset polymer. And whenever you create your resin formulation, as I said, you have oligomers, which dictate the mechanical properties, but they're usually very viscous, so you use a variety of monomers as diluents. You have a catalyst and co-catalyst, and a variety of filler materials. So you can have either ceramic or metal particles to enhance thermal or mechanical properties, or you could have a variety of pigments to give you a nicely colored resin. So it looks very easy, but there is a set of parameters you usually take into account when you create a new 3D printable resin, which is a set of tensile and flexural properties, so your mechanical properties. Do you want to have a rigid material, a flexible material, and that dictates the materials you're going to use in your resin. You need to take care about the rheology. So you want to have a nicely flowing resin with a low viscosity, so it replenishes nicely. It has to have a good printing speed, so it has to be fast enough, but also high accuracy. You want a good interlayer adhesion, so between the layers that stick together. If not, you will have a delamination process going on. And a good platform adhesion, but no adhesion to your vat. So all of these details are important when you create a 3D printable resin. So the devil is in the detail here. So we saw how to create materials for 3D printing, and now I would like to speak to you about 3D printing on a macro scale. So really using 3D printing for mass manufacturing. And here you can see a picture of our 3D print farm, which we used for mass manufacturing over 7 million parts during the COVID-19 crisis, so within a couple of months. So what happened in April, May, when COVID-19 hit Europe? in the whole world actually, there was a big shortage on PPE for healthcare staff, so for frontline workers. And creating PPE via conventional methods is injection molding. And the problem is that it takes months and months to create only the tooling for injection molding. So there was a big shortage and there was a huge demand. So that's when we came up with using 3D printing for mass manufacturing face shields, so retainers for face shields. And we did that using a print farm with about 40 3D printers. And we started creating this print farm on the 18th of May when we emptied our warehouse to actually start putting in printers for the print farm. And only 2 weeks later, we were able to make our first shipment of face shields and create a pilot manufacturing line, which we then improved. So we worked on the one hand on the design of the PPE. So at the beginning, we had a design which was not really optimized for for 3D printing. And we used design for additive manufacturing to reduce the amount of materials in our design, to reduce the amount of support, so to create a supportless STL file, and also to stack as many of them on the platform as possible. So we went from 100 parts on a platform to 210 parts with the optimized design. So within 3 hours, you had 210 parts. Also, we worked on a new material. So classical 3D printing works by 3D printing 50 to 100 micron layers. Our new formulation was capable of printing 350 micron layers, so much faster, and with an improved green strength, so the parts were holding very well on the platform, reducing the amount of failures. So this was the material, and we managed to basically within a month also put in a conveyor belt for post-processing. So the post-processing was all automated, and we had a record of over 60,000 parts printed in one day. So this enabled us to 3D print 7.7 million parts within only a couple of months for the National Health Service in the UK. So now we talked about mass manufacturing, 3D printing, large scale, large printers. And I would like to touch a little bit on our high resolution 3D printing, so our nanoscale for mass manufacturing of batteries. And the first question is, why would you want to 3D print a battery? And here we can see the scheme of an electric vehicle, and we can see the motor in the front, which is small and has been optimized to fit into an electric vehicle. And then we can see the size of our battery module in the middle of this electric vehicle, which is large, heavy, and takes up basically most of your electric vehicle. And this is because we use off-the-shelf cells for stacking them in our module. And that means you have either pouch cells or cylindrical cells, but you can't really change the cell geometry. And that leads to a really heavy electric vehicle with a limited range. So currently what you are doing is you are fabricating electric vehicles to fit around this really big and heavy battery pack rather than making batteries that fit into your electric vehicle. And most of the R&D in batteries in the last 3 decades has focused on making new materials, novel chemistries, and improving the performance of the battery materials. We don't want to reinvent the wheel and go and make new chemistries. What we are doing is we are radically redesigning the electrode and the cell architecture to enable higher capacities of your electrodes through design, through rational design. So we are not reinventing the battery chemistry, we are reinventing the design of batteries from the electrode to the battery cell and then to the stacking in the module. So our focus is on electrode and cell design. And what is the optimal design? So on the left side, you see a traditional battery. A traditional battery, lithium-ion battery in this case, has thin electrodes. And basically, the capacity of your electrode and therefore the performance of your battery depends on how many lithium ions can flow from anode to cathode and back. So whenever you have thin electrodes, you have a limited number of lithium ions which will flow from cathode to anode and back. Whenever you have thick electrodes, you have obviously more lithium ions that can flow from cathode to anode and therefore an increased capacity. So the concept of thick electrodes has been out there for a while. However, fabricating thick electrodes for batteries using the conventional calendering process is not possible because it leads to cracks and it leads to limitations of transport and so on. With 3D printing, you can actually design thick electrodes with certain porosities which are optimized and have an optimized lithium-ion flow. So simulations which we have done and also other groups have done have shown that the thickness of the electrode, the optimal thickness is around 200 microns, which is very well 3D printable. And then you can stack thick electrodes. However, there is a trick there, which is in the electrode architecture. And we already saw that thin electrodes mean less lithium ions that can flow, and therefore they have a reduced capacity. However, whenever we talk about thick electrodes, you need to make channels for the lithium ions to be able to flow. So you can picture it as having channels for lithium ions to flow through from the cathode over the separator to your anode. And that means that we need to play and design the porosity through which the lithium ions are going to flow. And this is possible with 3D printing. We can rationally design the tortuosity and the porosity of your electrode, so the electrode architecture, to make the best out of it and have the highest capacity possible. But not only the electrode design is important, also the cell design plays a role. So here we can see 3 different cells. The first one on the left is a conventional thin film battery cell, and you can see it has a thin electrode, a separator, and a thin anode. Then in the middle, we want to increase now the capacity of our electrodes or of our cell, so we make thick electrodes. But if we just use the same kind of design of your electrode, you see that also the size of the whole battery cell increases. So it will be a much heavier battery with an increased capacity, which is not what we want. But 3D printing, you can smartly stack also your anode and your cathode, so you can really design your battery to fit the most active material in there, for example, through interpenetrating electrodes. And this is the freedom that additive manufacturing provides you in batteries. So 3D printing batteries is on several different levels. We have the electrode architecture, which plays a major role, the electrode thickness, then you come to your cell design, so how you design your actual cell, and at the end, how do you stack your cells together in your battery pack and module. So what we are doing is we are creating batteries to fit into the application rather than applications to fit around your battery. And 3D printing provides you many benefits in batteries. So on the one hand, your cell design will allow you to create lighter and smaller batteries. Your electrode design, so your electrode architecture and porosity, allows you to get faster charging batteries with an increased energy density through, for example, thick electrodes. And how do you actually do that? So I can't tell you everything, but I can tell you a little bit about the electrode fabrication process. So we spoke about 3D printing materials and photopolymers. So in here we also have photopolymers. However, the amount of photopolymer is smaller, and you load your photopolymer with electrode active material, as well as a little bit of conductive additive. So you create a paste, which you then 3D print again layer by layer using your LCD screen, and you get your green 3D printed electrode. Green means just that it comes straight out of the printer. They are usually not green. You then post-process them using light and heat to give you your 3D printed electrode, which you can then assemble into your battery cell. And we have designed and built a special 3D printer for 3D printing electrodes. And in this case, you have your 3D printing along the Z-axis. This printer is extremely accurate because it uses very small screens, virtual reality headset screens, which have an incredibly high accuracy and small pixel pitch to give you a very good resolution that you need for 3D printing electrodes, especially for electrode architectures. Then your platform moves along the X-axis to go into the post-processing station, so automatic post-processing, so you don't have to handle the electrodes and you don't get any contamination problems in there. Here you can see a part which was this is a magnification of a part which was 3D printed with our LC Nano printer. Yeah, and with this, I would like to summarize what we've seen. So we have spoken about the concept of 3D printing using LCD screens. We have then gone over to designing photopolymer materials for 3D printing. We have seen the application of 3D printing on a macro scale, so for mass manufacturing. And then we touched a little bit on 3D printing for nano applications on electric batteries. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. So I guess I will stop sharing my screen now.
Awesome. So, thank you so much. We have lots of questions. So the first question is, you mentioned that 460-nanometer light can penetrate more deeply into the resin, and thus have
Sorry, I have a hard time understanding you, Amy. I'm not sure if it's my speaker or if it's your mic. Can we just retry the question?
Yes, let me take mine. All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The first question is, you mentioned that 460-nanometer light can penetrate more deeply into resin and thus make a more uniform part. Can you speak to your Z resolution given it is driven by resin absorption?
So if I understand correctly, the question is about why it penetrates more deeply into the resin and the Z resolution. So the Z bleed in this case. So we have done a lot of experiments on that. So this is particularly the case when you have particle-rich formulation. So in terms of Z bleed, we do see an improvement on the Z bleed with visible light as compared to UV light. So if you have the same formulation and you just have one with daylight photoinitiator and the other one with UV photoinitiator, yes, you do see an improvement with visible light as compared to UV light.
Can you share some renewable resins that you use?
Yes, so basically the monomers and oligomers, which are commonly used in 3D printing, they are based on petrochemicals. And what we are doing is we are looking for renewably sourced, or we have renewably sourced monomers and oligomers. So we synthesize also some oligomers ourselves, and they're, for example, based on corn or based on pine trees. You have a high percentage of renewable carbon content in them.
Is this LCD LED approach DLP?
Yes, so one of the big benefits we talked about is the area you can actually cure simultaneously using LCD screens. So it's faster, and also it has a more uniform light as compared to a lot of different technologies. And also LCD screens have one big benefit. They are quite cheap, so it's much more cost effective for large scale 3D printing.
Have you done any UV aging tests on your materials?
On some of them, yes. We have done UV aging tests. So it depends on the material, how the material behaves, obviously, but I'm happy to discuss this with you on a one-to-one basis. So share these results.
Your resin, again, sorry, I'm trying to read that.
No worries.
Can you mix into your resin dark nanometal powder?
Well, yeah, nano part, so we can, yes, but if you're talking about nano metal powders, some of them are pyrophoric, so I would be a little bit careful about which ones I choose. So assuming they're not pyrophoric, you don't need a glove box for mixing them, yes, it's possible. You need to look into the refractive index about how well they're printable, but we have done experiments with metals before, so there is some preliminary data there.
Great. How large of a battery can be printed?
So the answer is at the moment as large as you want. So the size of the battery depends on the size of the printer that you use and how you design the battery. So you can print small batteries and large batteries.
What kind of process have you used to prevent the polymers from prematurely curing before they are printed? You have to have stabilizers. Yeah.
So there are stabilizers. Unfortunately, that's industry secrets which stabilizers exactly we use, but there are light absorbers that you can use. Actually, we don't see premature curing with our photopolymers. So obviously, you put them into a dark bottle, but you do that also for UV resins, just to avoid the photo initiator also from decomposing. But there are light absorbers and tricks. Yeah. Good thinking.
Is there an advantage in mechanical properties for photopolymers using visible light versus UV light?
So you will have a more even cure. So you will have at the end, your end mechanical properties, if you have a post-processing, are very similar, but you will have a more even cure in your green stage, for instance. Another thing, sorry, on that I forgot, if you have very filled resins, so very particle filled resins, your difference is higher. So there you really see, yeah, there you have a big difference in terms of mechanical properties between UV and daylight.
Because of the penetration depth?
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
I think you already answered, but is LCD better than projector lens?
Well, it's basically what we answered with a build area that you can have the full layer projected at once with LCD.
How do the materials age in different environmental conditions?
Sorry, I didn't get the last question. Again, the microphone, or either the speakers or the microphone, are a bit of a problem.
Try it again. Age. How did the materials age depending on different environmental conditions?
Yes, so that depends on the material. It depends on the material and the environmental conditions. So for example, some of them, especially the rigid type materials, remain rather unaffected, whereas in flexibles, we do see an effect, flexible and tough materials. So it really depends on material and the humidity, the air humidity and the temperature you're looking at. So if you're looking at something which is 85% humidity, it will be different to 50% humidity.
Last question, Abigail wants to know where to find you after this. Are you going to be at a specific table?
I can be, yeah, so I will sit at a Trump table if there is still space. So I will stay in this open area here, and you're welcome to approach me. Otherwise, if you can't find me, my email is also on the slide. So you're welcome to just drop me an email, and I will help you as much as I can.
Awesome. For those that didn't catch the email, maybe you could put it in the chat for us.
Yeah, sure, will do.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This is just really, really interesting technology, so important for today as we move to more electric vehicles and electrified machines in general, and we just really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. So we're going to minutes so that you can maybe join another track if that's what you wish. You can also find the main stage link up here at the top. But we'll take just a really quick break and get started on our next speaker in just about 2 minutes.